My name is Samantha Hayes, and I had always believed that family meant unconditional love. I was 28 the night everything changed. I had spent most of my life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. Trying to be the daughter they wanted, the sister who would never complain, the niece who always helped but never asked for anything in return. I was careful, polite, and invisible enough that my parents could pretend everything was perfect. But that night, at that dinner, their pretenses fell apart, and mine did too. It started like any other Friday night. My mother called weeks in advance, insisting on a dinner at La Fontaine, the little fancy place downtown that my family loved more for its status than its food. White tablecloths, candles that weren't even real, a menu designed to intimidate anyone who didn't know the French pronunciations. I arrived early. I always arrived early. I had spent an hour choosing the right outfit, something elegant but not flashy, because somewhere deep down I thought maybe, just maybe tonight could be different. Maybe they'd just want to sit down as a family. No grudges, no judgment, no underlying competition. Of course I was wrong. When I walked in, the room already smelled like tension disguised as polite conversation. My mother was standing near the hostess, smiling too wide, her hands fidgeting as if she had rehearsed every gesture. My father, in his crisp suit, nodded at me briefly but didn't make room for any warmth. My older brother, Adam, was scrolling through his phone like he owned the place, occasionally smirking at something I couldn't see. And then there was Emily, my younger sister, the golden child. Effortlessly charming, effortlessly perfect, effortlessly the favorite. She glanced up at me with that faint smirk, the one that said, "I know I have you beat in everything and you know it too." Dinner started with small talk. What projects were happening at work, the latest gossip from distant relatives, complaints about the traffic. I tried to laugh along, to insert myself subtly into the conversation, but it was like throwing pebbles into a stormy ocean. My words barely registered. The breadbasket came and went. The first plates arrived, glistening and overpriced. I reached for my fork, trying to calm my racing thoughts. And then it happened. My mother set down her water glass with a faint clink that echoed far too loudly in the quiet restaurant. She looked at Emily and said, as casually as if she were talking about the weather, "It's for the ones who actually give something back." Time froze. I didn't immediately register what she meant. The word seemed to hang in the air, half elegant, half cruel. I glanced at Emily, who smiled just slightly, as though enjoying the private joke. Adam barely looked up, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. My father's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, the tight smile he gave when he was about to judge someone fully settled onto his face. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire, waiting for someone to snap it. I remember holding my fork in midair and thinking, this isn't new. This isn't sudden. This is just being revealed now. For years, I had been the family's invisible helper. I organized trips, handled finances quietly, ran errands, mediated fights, all while suppressing the small voice in my head that said, "They don't see you. They don't value you. They never have." Tonight, that voice didn't whisper. It roared. Emily tilted her head and whispered something that wasn't so quiet at all. Not even subtle. Adam finally looked up, scowling slightly at the words, and my father cleared his throat, as if to remind everyone that this was just another normal evening. I set my fork down carefully, my hands steady, which surprised even me. "Thanks for the honesty," I said softly. And I meant it, not because I appreciated it but because finally, they had said out loud what had been implied for years. I wasn't just unappreciated. I wasn't just overlooked. I was invisible. My contributions, my time, my efforts, they were never meant to be recognized, only taken. And now, the pretense had fallen away in a single sentence. "It's for the ones who actually give something back." That was their final judgment, their declaration that I wasn't enough. I breathed slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat there, letting the words sink into me, harden inside me. A quiet clarity spread through my chest, a knowledge that I wouldn't beg for recognition tonight, tomorrow, or ever again. Dinner continued around me, the conversation picking up as if nothing had happened, but I had already crossed an invisible line. My mind was calculating, not plotting, just observing. The betrayal was visible now, plain as daylight, and so was the path forward. I decided then, silently, in that little white linen cage of a restaurant, I would stop giving until they proved themselves worthy of it. I would stop trying to be part of a family that never really wanted me. The first step would be small, almost imperceptible. But it would be mine. The moment the last fork clinked against the plate, I knew I couldn't sit there pretending anymore. My parents carried on talking about wine pairings and Emily's latest internship victory as if nothing had happened, but I had already checked out. I pushed my plate back, my hands deliberately calm, and said, "I think I'll step out for a bit." No one stopped me. No one even looked. That was the point, wasn't it? My presence wasn't necessary. It was tolerated, convenient, invisible. Outside, the evening air hit me like a wave I didn't know I was holding back. My chest ached, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with the weight of clarity. For the first time, I saw the pattern of their family life without the fog of trying to belong. I walked down the street, letting the city lights blur against my vision. Every step reminded me of all the times I'd silently saved them. Arranging last-minute doctor appointments, paying for emergencies, rearranging my life to fix their messes. And yet, all of it had gone unnoticed. Tonight, it wasn't just unnoticed, it was openly dismissed. It's for the ones who actually give something back. I returned to my apartment in a kind of trance. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that only city apartments hold after the world has moved on. I dropped my keys on the counter, took off my coat, and sat down at the small desk by the window. The city glimmered below me, but I wasn't seeing it. My mind was racing, cataloging every slight, every expectation, every unspoken rule that had governed my life until now. By the time I opened my laptop, I knew what had to be done. Not with rage, not with a dramatic scene, but with action, the kind of quiet, deliberate action that left no room for manipulation. I started by reviewing the family accounts I had access to, the shared subscriptions, the recurring payments I had quietly managed for years. Every password I had memorized, every login I still controlled, I began to revoke. Slowly, methodically, I took back control of what had been mine all along. It felt strange at first, almost like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was reclamation. I wasn't taking revenge. I was protecting myself. The moment I realized this, a calmness settled over me. The fear that had lingered in the background for so many years. Fear of being abandoned, fear of confrontation, fear of being too much was evaporating. The next morning, I began to notice the small, subtle ways my family had depended on me without acknowledging it. Adam texted me about a meeting he'd forgotten to schedule, assuming I would fix it. Emily asked, innocently, if I had remembered to confirm a reservation she had never bothered to check herself. My parents, in their quiet ways, left messages that assumed my compliance, messages that no longer mattered. I didn't answer. I let them exist in the space I had created. And in that space, I felt something unfamiliar. Power. Not the kind that comes from yelling, not the kind that comes from slamming doors, but the steady, unshakable kind that comes from knowing you have a choice, and no one else can take it from you. It wasn't long before I realized that leaving things in their hands would only invite more of the same disregard. I began writing down everything I had done for them over the years. The loans, the emergency payments, the favors, the compromises. The list was long enough to make me gasp. Entire savings spent quietly to keep their lives running smoothly. Sacrifices I had made to ensure they never had to see the consequences of their own negligence. Once the list was complete, I stopped. I didn't send it, I didn't post it, I didn't use it to shame them. It existed solely for me, a concrete acknowledgement of the life I had lived and the value I had consistently provided in silence. And it was liberating. By midweek, the first signs of panic emerged. Adam called about a missed payment on a shared account. Emily left a voicemail about a reservation she hadn't confirmed. My parents, naturally, didn't reach out directly. They sent vague messages through mutual contacts, trying to gauge my reaction. I ignored it all. I had built a boundary strong enough that their panic could not breach it. Evenings became mine again. I cooked small meals I actually wanted to eat. I reorganized the apartment, moved things around just because I could. For the first time in my life, no one dictated the rhythm of my days. And yet, the awareness of my family's impending frustration was a strange companion. I didn't feel joy yet, only clarity and determination. The weekend arrived, and with it, the first test of my resolve. My mother called. Just her, no script, no sister whispering through the line. "Samantha," she said, soft but firm. "We need to talk. You can't keep doing this." I paused, listening to the silence on the other end, measuring the weight of every word. And then I spoke, slowly, deliberately. I've already started talking, Mom. It's called boundaries. I'm not available to manage what you refuse to handle yourselves. She sputtered. I heard the slight intake of breath as she tried to assert authority, tried to pull me back into the narrative I had been living for decades. I didn't respond. I hung up. The first wave had passed. But I knew this was just the beginning. My parents wouldn't let go easily. They would try to guilt, manipulate, and press every button I had allowed them to. But for the first time, I wasn't reacting out of fear. I was observing, planning, moving deliberately. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, listening to the city's hum. I realized that my life had become mine to shape. For years, I had been the invisible engine powering their comfort, their image, their convenience. Now I was the one in control of my energy, my time, and my choices. And I intended to keep it that way. By the beginning of the next week, it became clear that my family wasn't used to being ignored. Their little ecosystem, one I had sustained silently for years, was unraveling. Adam sent multiple texts, first asking politely, then slightly panicked, "Samantha, the account's overdue. You need to fix it." I didn't respond. I knew if I did, it would be just another invitation to step back into their chaos. Emily tried a different approach. She called me while I was in the middle of reorganizing my kitchen, her voice tight with fake cheerfulness. "Hey, I just wanted to make sure you saw my messages about the restaurant reservations for next month," she said, casually weaving guilt into the small talk. I paused, let her words hang in the air, then said softly, "I'm not managing your reservations anymore." Click. The line went dead. I spent the afternoon in a strange mixture of liberation and disbelief. Liberation because, finally, I wasn't responsible for anyone else's mistakes. Disbelief because I realized just how much my absence was destabilizing them. For years, I had been the invisible glue, and now the cracks were appearing for everyone to see. Then came the emails. First my father. Subject line, "Samantha, call us." Short, simple, nothing else. My mother followed with a message layered in emotion, guilt, and thinly veiled blame. "We're hurt. You're overreacting. Can we please talk?" I read both, set my laptop aside, and ignored them. I had decided in that quiet moment at the window a few nights ago that I wouldn't negotiate my dignity for temporary peace. But the escalation didn't stop there. By midweek, my cousin Derek texted me with a detailed account of what was unraveling back home. Overdue bills, missed deadlines, forgotten commitments, and the growing realization that none of them had been managing anything properly. They had relied on me entirely. Suddenly, it wasn't just minor inconveniences. Their financial mismanagement was causing tangible stress across the family. It was tempting, for a fraction of a second, to feel vindicated. But I didn't. This wasn't about revenge. It was about observation and clarity. The chaos that followed my quiet withdrawal was a mirror showing me exactly how much I had carried for them, and how little acknowledgement I had received. Then came the texts from my parents themselves, desperate and veiled with faux concern. My mother, always the emotional manipulator, tried to provoke guilt. "We didn't mean what we said at dinner. You're overreacting, Samantha. We just wanted a calm evening as a family." I let it sit. Not a single response. Silence was my shield now, and it worked. My father escalated in a more strategic way. One evening he called, his voice tight and measured. "Samantha, this is serious. You're cutting off the family over minor misunderstandings. We've always supported you. You need to come back and make things right." I listened calmly, breathing slowly, and then said, "I am not cutting off anyone. I am creating boundaries. And I will not compromise my peace to fit into the version of family you need me to be." Click. They didn't understand that my quiet actions carried far more weight than any outburst could. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't cried, I hadn't stormed out with a slam of the door, but my decisions had already begun to dismantle their carefully constructed comfort. Every missed payment, every unconfirmed plan, every detail I hadn't silently fixed anymore chipped away at their sense of control. By the weekend, Emily escalated to passive aggression. A message arrived, vague and sharp. "Some people just don't appreciate what others do for them. Hope you're happy being alone." I read it once, smiled faintly, and deleted it. She had expected emotion, guilt, tears, maybe even an apology. She got nothing. Even as their panic spread, I focused on building my own life. I started taking small steps to organize my time and space entirely for myself. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, rearranging things to suit my preferences instead of theirs. I started a small savings account separate from any shared family accounts, one that no one could access or manipulate. And I sat by the window in the evenings, quietly acknowledging the freedom that came with every decision they could no longer influence. Then, the first real test of their desperation arrived. A call from my father, urgent and strained. "Samantha, we need help immediately. There's a problem with the mortgage." "We can't." I cut him off internally. "Let him finish?" Why? They had never respected the years I spent quietly fixing their emergencies. This was no longer my responsibility. Emily tried one last emotional lever. She sent a text with a photo of a family moment from years ago, smiling faces and holiday decorations, carefully curated to pull at my sense of loyalty. But I had trained myself for this. I saw it for what it was. Manipulation disguised as sentiment. I didn't reply. Every attempt they made to draw me back was met with the same calm, deliberate refusal. And slowly, over those days, I realized something extraordinary. The power had shifted. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't begging for acknowledgement or pleading for inclusion. I wasn't even angry in the way they expected me to be. I was watching them unravel, quietly, and it was their own doing. By the end of the week, even Adam called once more, hesitant and careful. "Samantha, things are really messy here. We could use your help." I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let him speak. When he finished, I looked at him calmly and said one word. "No." No guilt. No pleading. No argument. Just a boundary firmly in place. And for the first time, I felt completely untouchable. That night, I wrote in my journal, not about anger, not about revenge, but about freedom. About the strange, liberating feeling that came from refusing to participate in someone else's chaos. About the quiet power in simply stepping back and letting the world reveal itself without my constant mediation. I didn't know how long this new dynamic would last. I only knew one thing. I wouldn't go back to being invisible. I wouldn't be the infrastructure anymore. That dinner had been the spark. This week, I had fanned the flames into clarity. And clarity was far more satisfying than any confrontation could ever be. By the second week, the cracks in my family's carefully maintained facade were no longer subtle. The bills I had quietly managed for years were now unpaid. Adam's texts turned frantic, Emily's calls insistent, and my parents' emails oscillated between desperate pleas and veiled threats. They had relied on me for so long that when I stopped, the consequences hit harder than anyone could have expected. It started with a call from the mortgage company. My father, breathless, explained that a payment had bounced. I listened quietly, as he tried to blame me for not reminding him, even though he had the statement in his own name. I didn't respond. Instead, I documented everything mentally, every instance where I had handled their affairs, every quiet act of support they had taken for granted. The anger that might have consumed me in the past didn't appear. There was only clarity. Then Emily called, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Samantha, you're making this much worse than it needs to be. You don't understand the stress you're causing." I paused, imagining her perfectly polished smile. "You've never understood my stress either," I thought. But I said nothing. I hung up and began organizing my own records, quietly checking through shared accounts, canceling auto payments that no one else should control. It was simple, administrative, and devastatingly effective. By midweek, I began receiving messages from extended family. "Are you okay? We heard about the mortgage. Please help them." I ignored most, but a few reached me with honest concern. I answered carefully, only to set clear boundaries. I would not be involved in fixing what they refused to manage themselves. I would not reinsert myself into the chaos that had dominated my life for decades. The real turning point came when I received a detailed email from my father, listing every financial mishap from the week, complete with attached screenshots and vague threats about consequences if I didn't intervene. I read it once, then calmly replied, "This is not my responsibility. I am not available to manage your obligations. You will need to find another solution." The next day, Adam texted me, frustrated, "This could ruin everything. You can't just walk away." I looked at the message, sipped my tea, and typed back a single word, No. No explanations, no justifications, no negotiations. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted completely. Their panic, their desperation, their growing realization that I had always been the backbone of their convenience, it was all visible now. And yet, I felt none of the schadenfreude I might have expected. I wasn't happy they were struggling. I was simply free. Then came Emily's last attempt. She texted a photo from a family vacation years ago, with the caption, "Remember when we were all together? Do you want to throw that away?" I read it, smiled faintly, and deleted it. She had expected tears, guilt, maybe a call. She got none. I spent the evenings that week reorganizing my apartment, not just physically, but emotionally. I made a list of every favor, every hidden loan, every emergency I had handled for them over the years. It was a quiet catalogue of my own life, a reminder that while they had never acknowledged me, I had acknowledged myself all along. The climax of their unraveling came when my father realized that some overdue accounts had accrued late fees, impacting his credit. Adam panicked about unpaid bills affecting his own finances. Emily found herself dealing with double-booked events she hadn't managed properly. And my parents? They argued among themselves, realizing how much they had depended on me, how little foresight or organization they actually possessed. By now, the pattern was clear. Their family structure had been a house of cards, and I had quietly removed the keystone. The collapse wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was administrative, methodical, and unstoppable. And I watched it from a distance, not out of malice, but out of clarity. Amid this chaos, I started taking steps to solidify my own life. I opened a personal savings account that no one else could access. I began freelancing remotely, building income streams that relied only on my own efforts. I organized my apartment, bought small comforts for myself, and started living on my own terms. For the first time in my life, no one dictated how I should live, what I should spend, or how I should behave. The strangest feeling was the quietness of it all. They were panicking, scrambling, begging, and I was calm. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't celebrating their misfortune. I was living. And that calmness, that quiet control, was more satisfying than any confrontation could ever be. By the end of the week, I had received a call from my cousin Derek. He was confused, asking what had happened. I explained briefly that I had set boundaries, stopped managing their chaos, and would no longer intervene in their financial or personal matters. He listened in silence, then said quietly, I had no idea you were carrying all of this alone." That one acknowledgement felt more powerful than all the confrontations, accusations, and arguments I had endured over the years. I realized then that the collapse of their dependency was necessary. Not for me, but for them. They had never known what life was like without me silently holding everything together. Now they would have to. And as I went about my evenings, sipping tea and tidying my apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Freedom. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't being cruel. I was finally living my own life, and letting the consequences of my absence speak louder than any argument could. By the third week, their desperation had taken a new form. My parents had realized that direct pleading and phone calls weren't working, so they moved to indirect tactics. Social media became their stage. Posts about ungrateful children and family betrayal started appearing. Carefully worded, vague enough to suggest I was the villain, but public enough to draw the concern of relatives and friends. I scrolled through the posts once, then closed the app. I didn't panic. I didn't respond. Instead, I took notes. Each post, each comment, each emoji-laden accusation was catalogued quietly in a folder on my laptop. Not out of spite but for my own awareness. I had learned over the years that the quieter you are while the chaos unfolds, the clearer the picture becomes. Then came the texts from extended family. "Are you okay? Please talk to your mother, she's worried. We don't understand why you're being so harsh." I read them all, but only responded to those I trusted to understand the truth. I am not harsh. I am protecting myself. I am reclaiming my life. That was my quiet mantra. Even Emily tried her hand at manipulation via others. My cousin Lena, always sensitive to family tension, received a long voicemail from her insisting, "You have to tell Samantha to fix this. She can't just abandon us like this." When Lena called me later, I calmly explained my boundaries. I'm not abandoning anyone. I am stepping out of the role I was forced to play. If they want their lives in order, they'll need to take responsibility themselves. The more they tried to pull me back, the clearer I became about one crucial fact. I didn't owe them my life or my peace. They had trained me to believe that my love and loyalty were conditional, measured by my willingness to give until I broke. But now, I was measuring my own value, not theirs. One evening, a particularly public post from my mother caught my attention. She had posted a vague, emotionally loaded paragraph about children who choose anger over gratitude, and included a faded childhood photo of me, carefully cropped to look innocent and compliant. Comments flooded in, "You should forgive her, family first. She's being selfish." I smiled faintly. Their narrative had been carefully curated, but they had no real power over me anymore. Instead of responding or defending myself, I took a different approach. I updated my privacy settings, muted notifications, and focused on my own circle. Friends who knew me, neighbors who cared, and colleagues who respected boundaries. The rest could talk. I didn't need to listen. Then came Adam, cautiously messaging me through a private channel. "Things are really bad. Mom's crying at work, Dad's stressed, Emily won't stop blaming herself. Can you help them?" I paused. I considered every instinct I'd suppressed over the years, the desire to fix, to soothe, to make peace at my own expense. But instead, I leaned back in my chair and typed a single calm sentence. "I will not step back into your chaos. This is your responsibility, not mine." A quiet shift occurred over the next few days. The more I remained composed, the more my family's public attempts to manipulate me seemed futile. Friends who had initially worried began asking privately, "What actually happened?" And this was when clarity spread outside the family. For every post meant to shame me, a cousin or two reached out privately to understand my perspective. I explained, calmly and without drama, the years of silent labor, the unpaid contributions, the emotional and financial burden I had carried. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Comments on my mother's posts dwindled, replaced by supportive messages acknowledging boundaries, self-respect, and accountability. My mother's carefully constructed image of moral high ground faltered because the truth was visible to anyone willing to look. And through it all, I stayed silent publicly, letting the facts speak quietly for me. At home, I continued to reclaim my life. I reorganized my apartment, bought a small plant for the kitchen, and started cooking meals I actually wanted to eat. I adopted a small cat, Luna, who immediately claimed the sunny spot on my windowsill. Nights became peaceful, a stark contrast to the anxiety-laden evenings I had spent answering frantic calls and fixing mistakes for them. One afternoon, I received a call from my Uncle Jeff. He had seen the posts, the public stir, and wanted to understand the reality. I walked him through it, calmly recounting years of unrecognized effort, boundaries ignored, and constant expectation to sacrifice. He listened quietly, saying only, I had no idea." Later, he mentioned confronting my mother. She tried to spin the story, but the details were too clear, the inconsistencies too stark. By now, my family's social leverage had collapsed. Friends and distant relatives no longer echoed my mother's narrative blindly. Their desperation became transparent, their manipulation ineffective. And I, quietly, had done nothing dramatic. No screaming, no posts, no confrontations. Just clarity, patience, and firm boundaries. The final tipping point came when Emily called, tearful and frantic, attempting one last plea for intervention. I listened for a minute, and then said, softly but firmly, "I am not your caretaker. I am not responsible for your mistakes. You will have to solve this yourselves." Click. For the first time, the pressure lifted entirely. No more calls. No more posts. No more guilt trips. The family's public attempts at manipulation had completely failed. And I realized with quiet satisfaction that reclaiming my peace had not required anger. It had required consistency, boundaries, and unwavering calm. That night, as I sipped tea by the window, Luna curled up beside me, I understood something fundamental. Freedom is rarely loud. It is silent, deliberate, and impossible to take away once it is claimed. Weeks passed, and the quiet I had fought so hard to claim became my daily companion. My phone no longer buzzed with frantic messages, and the social media storm had settled into oblivion. It was strange at first, this emptiness where chaos once lived. But it wasn't lonely, it was peace. I started shaping my days entirely for myself. Mornings began with coffee at the small table I had built, sunlight spilling across its uneven surface. The screws weren't perfect, the wood slightly warped, but it was mine, crafted by my own hands. A simple act yet profound. For years, my parents had dictated what I could and couldn't have, what was worthy of my time, and now, even the act of furniture assembly was a quiet rebellion, a tangible manifestation of freedom. Work became my sanctuary. Freelance projects, once squeezed between family emergencies, now received my full attention. I set my own deadlines, chose my clients, and relished the creative space I had carved for myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't serving as a background character in someone else's life. I was the protagonist in my own story, and the narrative was entirely mine to shape. Evenings became reflective. Luna, my cat, had grown bold, sprawling across the floor or perching on the windowsill as if she understood the gravity of our new equilibrium. I had read somewhere that animals sense energy, and I believed it. She had claimed the apartment as much as I had, and together, we inhabited a space that was quiet, safe, and entirely ours. Then came the final check-ins. My cousin Derek, seeing the fallout, called one evening. "Samantha," he said cautiously, "you've changed things. They're finally realizing what they lost." I didn't reply immediately. I didn't need to. The acknowledgement itself was enough. "Yes," I finally said softly, "and it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not coming back." The calls stopped gradually, and the emails became sporadic, polite at best, resentful at worst. My mother tried one last indirect maneuver, a holiday card with a carefully posed family photo and a handwritten note, thanking me for all the past help and love. I read it once, then placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The gesture was empty. I had long ceased chasing approval, and the card served only as a reminder of how far I had come. I realized something important in those quiet evenings. Freedom isn't dramatic. It doesn't need confrontation or explosive declarations. Freedom is built in small, deliberate choices. It's choosing to make your own meals, to set your own schedule, to sleep when you want, to live without the constant whisper of expectation in your ear. And most importantly, it's choosing who gets to influence your life, and who doesn't. One afternoon, I received a message from Emily. She had finally spoken to Derek, and through him she acknowledged the truth. The years of reliance, the unspoken sacrifices, the invisible labor I had carried for them all. She asked, cautiously, if I was okay. I replied simply, "I am. I always will be." And that was the end of it. No apologies required. No confessions needed. My life had shifted too far forward for them to catch up. The apartment continued to transform into a reflection of my choices. I bought a small bookshelf and filled it with novels I actually wanted to read, journals I wrote in without anyone peering over my shoulder, and mementos of personal achievements they had never witnessed. I planted small flowers in the windowsill. Each bloom was a symbol, not of revenge, but of growth. Quiet, persistent, beautiful growth. Work flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Freelance clients appreciated the focus and calm I now brought to every project. I started a side project, documenting stories of personal resilience, boundaries, and quiet triumphs. I realized that sharing my experience could help others find their own voice, just as my own voice had finally returned. And yet, the most profound change wasn't external. It was internal. For years, I had defined myself through their recognition. Praise, acknowledgement, even grudging approval. That need was gone. I measured my worth not by what I gave them, not by the invisible labor they had claimed as mine, but by how I felt living my own life. Each day, each decision, each quiet success reinforced the person I had always been beneath the expectations. One evening, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Luna curled up beside me, and I felt a swell of gratitude, not for the family I had left behind, but for the life I had built. There was no drama, no confrontation, no final showdown. There didn't need to be. I had won in the most profound way possible. Through self-respect, boundaries, and quiet persistence. Freedom, I realized, was quiet. But it was unstoppable. And as the night deepened, I poured a cup of tea, settled into the uneven comfort of my handmade chair, and smiled. The apartment, the work, Luna, the books, the small blooms on the windowsill, all of it belonged to me. For the first time in my life, there was no one to dictate my worth, no one to claim my time or energy, no one to question my choices. I was finally irrevocably free. And that was enough.